Welcome to this month's episode of the PA Path. I'm Emma Sellers, Chief Recruitment and Engagement Officer at the PA Education Association. I'm delighted to have PAEA CEO Dr. Sarah Fletcher as our guest. Dr. Fletcher has worked with the PA Education Association for more than 10 years. Well, Sarah, we are so excited that you are here with us today and just look forward to having just an open conversation about your thoughts, your experiences, and your vision a little bit for the PA Path podcast.
Emma, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the podcast, and your leadership has brought such a tremendous impact with this podcast. And so I'm just excited to keep it going and excited about all of the different listeners that are involved at this point. What an impact it's made so far.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. To what you said, we've taken on some new leadership a little bit with the PA Path podcast, and we relaunched this just a year ago to bring information and transparency to everyone who's involved in the PA Path. And of course, that's pre-PA students all the way to advisors, faculty, the whole community of folks. When you think about the last year, particularly from your vantage point as a CEO, how would you summarize the podcast's purpose and the impact of the past year?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to believe it's only been a year because the impact is so tremendous. In terms of its purpose, I think the podcast is doing exactly what we intended it to do, which, as you said, is bringing such greater awareness and transparency to that continuum of PA education. Certainly for anyone who's even thinking about becoming a PA, to those who are actively in the process of applying, I think that it has done a remarkable job of just making sure that accurate information is available and that it's accessible to anyone who's listening. And hopefully, as we know, most things happen through word of mouth. Hopefully someone listening tells someone else. And clearly, after over 50,000 downloads of the podcast, I think the impact, speaks for itself. I've been thrilled to know that our impact is not just here in the U.S., but now across 4 additional countries. And clearly it's taken off in a really remarkable way. And then the topics that you cover, I think, are so important for the listeners. Everything from, I know we'll get into some more of these in a little bit in granularity, but I've loved the holistic approach. So whether it be about the financing or something about the prerequisites, just the really broad topics that you cover, I think have got to be tremendously helpful for all listeners.
Thanks, Sarah. And you actually segue into the next topic I really wanted to jump into a little bit. We have worked to cover, again, all aspects of our community. And to your point, have addressed a number of topics, just to name a few: ghosting in PA admissions, which was a fun episode to discuss, and expanding access through virtual shadowing in the various ways that has shifted since COVID, especially. And then, of course, more pressing issues of the time, such as financing the future of PA education. Again, coming from your perspective and all that you work with and understand about the PA education world, how do these topics reflect what you're seeing to be a broader shift in higher education, whether it's access, affordability, technology, or really any topic under the sun that we've had to work with over the past year?
Yeah, absolutely. What's so interesting about just the 3 you pointed out, the access, affordability, and technology, it occurs to me those 3 topic areas have always been a part of PA education and higher education writ large. However, I think what the podcast does really is contextualizing them for today's listener, today's audiences. We know that access is something that we constantly have to grapple with in education for all various facets. And given the external and internal environments right now affecting higher education, access is becoming increasingly important. And so helping students as well as health professions advisors and applicants and really anybody with that interest in PA education understand the importance of access. When we think about not just access to education, but access to care, that continuum is really well reflected in the different episodes. Affordability, as you mentioned, good gosh, I don't have to say much more, but affordability with education's always been an issue, and especially as we are in today's environment where there are threats to student financing options like Grad Plus and loan repayment programs. And then technology, you mentioned the ghosting and the virtual interview that's available today. And you're right, since COVID, technology has taken on a whole new presence for all of us. But I think my hope is that as people listen to the different podcasts and thinking about technology in particular, how do we use technology to make access to PA education really more positive? So, for example, interviewing we know is so expensive. And so if there's opportunities to leverage technology for some video conferencing or virtual interviewing, but also really balancing that with sometimes the misuse of technology and the cautions we hear around sometimes the over reliance on technology that could impact a program's ability to really get to know an applicant and trust that the person sitting in front of them truly is that person. I think all of that right now is just so at the forefront of PA education.
Absolutely. And I think as many topics as we work to highlight, there's that many more, and there's some more layers. As you mentioned, the connection with access and technology or affordability and access, we could go so much further down to really expose some different topics. So thank you so much for just bringing those to the forefront.
Yeah.
I want to spend a little bit of time, though, going back to the finance piece, as that has been such a big topic for a variety of reasons in the higher education landscape, and of course, down into the PA education landscape as well. And so, in our financing episode, we touched on student debt, program costs, funding, the whole gamut. And in higher ed, of course, the pressure on costs and return on investment is intense. And we know that our students, all students going into higher education, are really looking at the cost and the return on investment as they choose their future careers. How is PAEA helping programs and students respond to those pressures? And how can the podcast or how did the podcast episodes help amplify that conversation?
The podcast definitely helped amplify the conversation. And one of the things I appreciate so much about that episode in particular with both you and Tyler, I think just really solid information. So, for example, the awareness of options that are available to students and hopefully will continue to be available. Everything from those private to federal options, even the things where we're able to work to pay off or get debt forgiveness. I think those were so helpful to lay out because not everybody is aware of those options. And I also appreciated the distinction between some of the undergrad financing and versus graduate financing options because like most of us, when you go through undergrad, that's what you know to be the case, and really understanding the distinctions at the graduate level and what are available options for folks. As far as our programs and those applicants, I think both of them can benefit from hearing about some of the cautions with the options that are available and just how to think about what makes the most sense for individuals depending on all sorts of circumstances, but to know that there is help out there and available. And PAEA, of course, one of our biggest, I think, opportunities and something we constantly work on is advocacy to secure funds for programs and for students, because that is work that never ends and it's important work because those who want to be healthcare providers really to have that opportunity. And I think the podcast just is really a great way to further that message and bring a lot of awareness and understanding to the financing of PA education.
Absolutely. And that's, again, to your point, our goal was to just ensure that everyone was touched on because we all have a role truly in helping students determine how to finance and how to move forward and highlighting many of those options. And in doing so, we want to ensure that we have a diversity of guests. We have PA educators, we have program directors, students, admissions professionals, all across, again, our listening spectrum. How do you think featuring these voices across the listening spectrum, across the PA path spectrum, help PAEA meet its mission and reflect contemporary ideas in higher education?
Well, I think it's one of the things we do really well as an organization, and this was no exception. One of our core values is inclusivity. And so, really, I think having that breadth and depth of perspective from, like you said, applicants, faculty, just across the board, I think each of those different audiences brings a perspective that complements and builds upon the other. Applicants certainly can teach us things that we just don't think about sometimes and help identify blind spots. But you can also say the same for the students and the faculty as well. And so I think just really being mindful, and I know you all are always so intentional to make sure you have a great representation of all the audiences and stakeholders that are affected or part of this community, I think really brings a level of depth and insight that can benefit everyone who's listening.
When we follow on the same trend of the audience and the guests and things of that nature, and our community, the whole PA community that we hope are listening to the podcast, what is one ask that you would make of the PA education community? Again, our program members, students, applicants, faculty, to help strengthen this podcast role and the broader ecosystem of PA education?
Great question. I think my most probably specific ask would be to help us see around corners and identify blind spots. So, concretely, what I mean by that is our team does, and I think, a fantastic job of trying as much as possible to highlight and amplify the most pressing issues and the things that keep people awake at night or they want to know most about in this space. But I also know that as try as we may, we're not going to pick up on everything that may be of importance in this arena. And so for those in our community, I think all of us really can share the responsibility of making sure that we're educated and informed at the right level. And so if there are ideas or issues that are emerging and that folks are aware of that they think may be a benefit for others to learn from, I certainly would love for them to share them with us because, again, I know our goal is to make sure that we are providing the right information, the right level of information and changes are happening so fast these days that it's just helpful to have more eyes and ears than less.
Changing so fast. That is the key there to keeping us going. And just I'm going to dig into that a little bit more just for our listeners. So again, things are happening fast. We need folks ears to the ground to keep us updated so we can ensure that we're providing the right information. How can all of our listeners provide feedback or even again become active partners in the podcast because we want to hear ideas, we want to hear from future guest topics. How can they connect with us as an association?
Yeah, absolutely. There's multiple ways I would say. One, obviously, folks can reach out directly to any of us, including myself, and they do. I hear from a variety of different segments of our community, faculty, staff, students, applicants, health professions, advisors, certainly direct outreach. We also have a growing presence on social media. And so I would encourage folks to really follow us on like LinkedIn, for an example, and really got to get involved. But sharing ideas through programs and through the different interactions we have. We are so fortunate to have a community of people that care. So our faculty and staff at our programs, they listen to students and they value input and they also, many of them interface with applicants throughout K-12 in an effort to really bring awareness to what PAs are and the profession. And so I think talking to each other and those ideas will, I think, eventually make its way to us if you don't do it directly, but we certainly encourage direct outreach as well.
As always, it's a pleasure to see you again on screen, at least, and chat with you a little bit through the podcast. And just from my perspective, is taking over this, for lack of better words, this year, it has just been a pleasure to have your support and your encouragement to really shift this path a little bit of the way of the podcast. And I hope that our listeners have truly benefit from it. And we just absolutely looking forward to another great season this year.
Emma, likewise. It's always a pleasure to get to connect with you. And so thank you again for this opportunity. And thank you for all the great work you're doing. It's definitely making an impact across the community and beyond.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
I appreciate Sarah for joining us. And thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of the PA Path. Join us each month as we speak with leaders in our profession, both nationally and worldwide.